Hey guys, tonight we travel back to an era of buttoned-up sleepwear. Flickering gas lights and rooms so overstuffed with fabric and furniture, they felt more like theatrical sets than places to rest. You're standing in the middle of a Victorian bedroom. Now lace curtains drawn tight, the wallpaper flaunting a floral pattern that's suspiciously aggressive, and the air filled with the faint scent of mothballs and lavender sachets. Let's be honest, if you lived in this time period, you probably wouldn't survive the dust alone. But hey, you do look great in those embroidered slippers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we're at it, go ahead and drop your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far we travel together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the creaky wooden floorboards, feeling a gentle give beneath the intricate rug. The air is oddly still, disturbed only by the slow settling of dust motes as you pass. The bed in the corner looks more like a stage prop than something you'd willingly crawl into. 4 towering posts are draped with heavy velvet deep maroon, of course framing a lumpy mattress that seems to be stuffed with hay secrets and maybe a few regrets. Every item in the room is doing the most. The bureau has more drawers than you can count, none labeled, each with knobs that feel like they were forged in some unnecessarily ornate workshop. The mirror is oval tilted, and you swear it's judging your modern haircut. Even the lamp, which glows faintly with gas, appears suspiciously overqualified for its role as source of light. The Victorians didn't just decorate a bedroom, they engineered it. Layers upon layers of fabric, the bedspread, then the coverlet, then the blanket, then the sheet, and somewhere beneath all that, the mattress. It's like an archaeological dig in textile form. And beneath it all, maybe, just maybe, a creaky wooden frame with a hidden panel or two. You ease down onto the edge of the bed, feeling the springs beneath you groan like they're holding back centuries of unspoken grievances. The room smells faintly of rosewater and old paper. A draft sneaks in from the window. Victorians were obsessed with airflow, paranoid about miasma, or bad air believed to cause illness. Ironically, the very things they did to improve their health: gaslights, unventilated stoves, even the painted wallpaper, were slowly poisoning them. Historians still argue whether the average Victorian bedroom was more dangerous than cozy. The arsenic used in some green wallpaper dyes could make people sick. Carpets were rarely cleaned thoroughly. And as for those thick drapes, perfect for trapping soot from the coal fires burning day and night, you run your hand along the edge of a side table and find a doily, because of course you do. Everything in this room is either cushioned or covered in lace lampshades, lace-edged pillowcases, a lace runner over a bureau that is already upholstered with gilt. The Victorians were not minimalists. They were collectors of comfort and chaos. If it wasn't nailed down or edible, it probably went in a drawer. And that mindset spilled into how they thought about sleep, not just something you do, but something you stage. Even the position of the bed in the room was deliberate. Facing a window, near the fireplace, or oriented with spiritual principles in mind. Feng shui wasn't a thing in England yet, but superstition absolutely was. Many beds were placed to avoid alignment with doorways, because that's how corpses were carried out of rooms feet first. Sweet dreams. One fringe theory floating around among amateur historians is that some bed frames were designed specifically to hide not just belongings but spiritual protection objects, like tiny iron charms or carved talismans. While not widely proven, It wouldn't be surprising, given how many Victorians had a toe dipped in spiritualism, while the other was wrapped in a wool sock. As you pull back a corner of the coverlet, you find yourself caught on a small metal clasp embedded into the wood. You tug gently, and part of the sideboard gives way, just a sliver. Not enough to reveal anything just yet, but enough to suggest the story has layers. And so does this bed. Victorian furniture was often custom built. Mass production was starting to grow, but for families with any money or aspirations of status, a bed was as much about personal branding as it was comfort. A single bed might feature secret compartments, not because someone had anything especially scandalous to hide, but simply because they could afford it. And because the idea of hiding things, no matter how mundane, scratched a particular cultural itch. There's something strangely comforting about knowing that even in the past, people wanted somewhere private to shove the stuff they didn't want others to see: love letters, liquor bottles, family spoons, or that ridiculous gift from a cousin they couldn't stand but had to keep anyway. You lean back against the oversized pillows, some of which feel more like sandbags than cushions, and imagine trying to fall asleep in this room. You'd have to get past the scratchy flannel, the draft seeping through a badly sealed window, and the knowledge that your mattress might house not just secret compartments but bedbugs in morning attire. Still, there's a charm to it. A dusty, lace-covered charm that hums softly under all the clutter. In this room, sleep doesn't sneak up on you. It tiptoes in navigating obstacles, pausing to adjust the blanket folds, and settling gently, like a forgotten story whispered behind the bureau. You let your eyes drift toward the carved bedpost nearest you, twisted like a barley sugar stick with little florets etched so carefully it feels almost excessive. But that's the Victorian style for you. If it's not ornate, is it even trying? Your hand traces along the headboard, thick and polished, and you notice a thin seam where the wood doesn't quite align. It's subtle, but it has that air of deliberate misalignment, like a secret waiting to be discovered. Victorian furniture often came with those touches, not just design for design's sake, but function cloaked in mystery. You press your fingers lightly and hear a soft click. The panel shifts opening just enough to expose a hidden compartment, maybe 6 inches wide, deep enough to store a diary, a flask, or a few contraband biscuits. People today hide snacks in desk drawers and shoeboxes. In the 1800s, they had trap doors in their beds. Same energy, different aesthetic. Now here's where it gets oddly specific. Not all Victorian beds had these compartments, of course, but some high-end models did, especially in households where privacy was a scarce commodity. Servants often moved freely between rooms, so a little built-in storage spot gave the illusion of secrecy. In a world without locks on everything, especially useful for keeping medicine close at hand or stashing letters you didn't want your nosy aunt reading while she borrowed your hairbrush. One of the more charming theories about these compartments is that they weren't always practical. Sometimes they were sentimental, meant to hold mementos or good luck charms, like pressed flowers from a wedding bouquet or a faded baby shoe. Historians still argue whether these touches were born out of practicality or pure emotional Victorian over-engineering. Either way, it's weirdly wholesome. You picture someone in a flannel nightgown, lifting the mattress slightly to tuck away a miniature keepsake box. A tiny portrait maybe, or a lock of hair tied with ribbon. Yes, keeping locks of hair was absolutely a thing. In fact, there was a whole jewelry industry dedicated to it. Hair bracelets, hair brooches, hair wreaths. Not creepy at all, totally normal. Your attention drifts to the window now. It rattles gently with the night breeze. The curtains are drawn tight, but the draft still seeps through. In some households, these windows would have been sealed during winter, stuffed with newspaper, lined with thick wool curtains. And all of this done while people still feared that too little air at night would stagnate your lungs. That's the Victorian paradox. For you always a bit terrified, always a bit extra. The mattress shifts under your weight again, groaning like an elderly librarian whose patience is wearing thin. The thing is stuffed with horsehair straw, or if you were truly fancy down feathers. Over time, these materials clump shift and form valleys deep enough to lose a cat in. Still, if you flattened it just right and curled in the shape of a comma, you could get surprisingly cozy. Sort of like reverse ergonomic support, by which we mean no support at all, but at least your spine learned resilience, as you breathe in the scent of old wood and lavender sachets. You imagine what it must have been like preparing for bed in this world. You wouldn't just flop into bed, you'd be put to bed. It was a whole routine. Close the drapes, stoke the fire, fill the chamber pot, wind the clock. Heat the bedpan, yes, a literal pan filled with hot coals used to warm the sheets. That's trust on another level. One wrong move and you've charbroiled your mattress. A curious historical detail. Some Victorian beds, especially four-posters, had canopies not for drama, but for practicality. Drafty homes meant nighttime air could be frigid, and those heavy curtains could trap warmth. Plus, if you lived in a house with open rafters or, say, bats. They added a little insurance policy between you and a potential midnight visitor. Speaking of visitors, many Victorian bedrooms had bell pulls near the bed. You'd tug the little cord, and somewhere in the house, a bell would chime to summon a servant. Some houses had a whole system of coded bells to indicate which room needed assistance. Very Downton Abbey, only with worse plumbing. You lift the mattress corner again and notice something else, a faint scrawl inside the wooden frame. A name maybe, or a set of initials. Faded by time but still there. People signed furniture, etched little notes, sometimes even carved prayers or protective symbols into the wood, hoping to ward off sickness, death, or taxes. Though even back then, taxes were likely the one thing no bed charm could prevent. A fringe theory among antique collectors says that some secret compartments were added later, not by furniture makers, but by owners who modified their beds after reading crime novels or following political upheaval. Hidden documents, money, or passports in the post-Napoleonic era. Was it paranoia? Maybe, but it does give the idea of sleeping on your secrets a very literal spin. As you settle back into the pillows, the room hums with its own quiet energy. Outside, the wind nudges the shutters. Inside, the glow from the gas lamp dims slightly as the pressure shifts. In the quiet, it's easy to understand why Victorians believed the veil between this world and the next was thinnest at night. Spiritualism flourished in this era. Seances weren't just parlor tricks. They were weekly rituals for some. And bedrooms especially, those with canopies and flickering lights, became unintentional theaters for the imagination. A creaking floorboard, a visiting spirit. A whisper of wind, a ghost passing through the lace. Or maybe it was just that loose window pane again. You glance once more at the compartment, now slightly ajar. What did it once hold? A bottle of laudanum for someone who couldn't sleep? A treasured letter from a lost love? Or just an emergency peppermint drop for long nights of coughing? You let the panel slide shut again with a soft click. The past doesn't always reveal its secrets, but it does like to leave hints. Tiny carved lace-covered hints that whisper just loud enough to keep you wondering. And in this room, where every thread and hinge has a purpose, the story continues long after the lights go out. The compartment clicks back into place, barely a seam left to betray its presence. It's that kind of understated mystery that seems to saturate the Victorian bedroom, where every flourish hides a function and every creak feels like a whisper from the past. You stretch your legs across the uneven mattress and let the room settle again, like an old ship adjusting to the quiet of still waters. From here, your eyes drift to the nearby washstand, a fixture that would have stood beside most beds, even in modest homes. A ceramic basin, a matching pitcher, and maybe a bar of soap carved with curls and flowers. In an era where bathing was a complicated endeavor involving kettles, tin tubs, and heated bricks, this little setup was the pinnacle of nighttime hygiene. A splash on the face, a rinse of the hands, maybe a dab of rose water behind the ears. Squeaky clean Victorian edition. But even this humble furniture piece sometimes pulled double duty. Lift the basin out, and what do you find? Another compartment. Not every washstand had one, but some were designed with secret drawers or false bottoms, ideal for hiding jewelry love letters, or the occasional brandy flask, because nothing says goodnight like a discreet sip from a hidden stash behind your toothbrush stand. There's a charming contradiction in how the Victorians obsessed over morality and modesty, while simultaneously inventing furniture that practically begged to keep secrets. Hidden drawers in desks, false panels in wardrobes, and yes, compartments under mattresses. It's as though they were constantly negotiating, with their own rules desperate to appear proper, while preparing for every scenario in which they might not be. One of the most surprising discoveries from 19th century estate inventories. The sheer volume of hidden storage documented in personal belongings. Chests with false bottoms, chairs with removable cushions, even footstools that doubled as lockboxes. Historians still argue whether this trend was driven more by fears of theft prying eyes or the sheer fun of having a little secret no one else knew. You get the feeling it might have been all three. In fact, there was even a short-lived cottage industry of secret furniture in the mid to late 1800s. Artisans offered custom pieces with cleverly disguised compartments, marketed to the upper middle class as symbols of refinement and discretion. You weren't just stylish, you were subtle, which ironically was not a subtle status move at all. As you lean back against the cool headboard, the air grows still. There's something deeply calming about how all these little details served not just function, but comfort, mental and emotional. A private drawer meant a sense of control. A warmed mattress meant less anxiety over catching night chills. A hidden locket in the washstand was a whispered connection to someone long gone. And that brings you to the idea of memory storage, not digital but tangible. The Victorians were champions of sentimental hoarding. Mourning jewelry, keepsake boxes, miniatures of deceased loved ones. Even furniture passed through generations bearing nicks and scratches as sacred as scripture. Beds especially became emotional landmarks. It wasn't uncommon for people to be born wed or die in the same bed frame over decades. That creaky four-poster, it might have cradled entire lifetimes. A strange tidbit. Some beds were designed to be partially dismantled and transported for travel. Imagine disassembling your bed to take it on holiday. It's peak Victorian logic, never sleep in a strange bed if you can help it, just bring your own. It's like packing your own pillow. If your pillow weighed 200 pounds and required a horse cart, and even the fabrics told stories. the heavy quilts, often hand-stitched by family members, weren't just warm, they were narrative. Symbols embroidered with initials, birds, stars, and forget-me-nots. Patterns that matched no catalog, only the rhythm of memory and tradition. Some quilts were made from old dresses or baby clothes, making each square a soft relic. You can imagine running your fingers over the seams, each one a sentence in a textile journal. Of course, these rituals varied greatly between classes. A wealthy Victorian might sleep in a mahogany canopy bed draped in imported silks, while a working-class family could share a single straw-stuffed mattress on a wooden frame in a drafty room. But even then, the impulse to protect, to store, to preserve that was universal. You shift slightly and feel a slat groan beneath you. Another charm of these beds, the unapologetic soundtrack of wood under stress. No metal springs yet, just wood nails and the occasional rope lattice woven under the mattress. If you were lucky, you had a bed key to tighten those ropes before sleeping. And if not, well, you just slept diagonally and hoped for the best. Sleep Hygiene 1870s edition. Here's where things get delightfully specific again. The phrase sleep tight comes from this very practice. Tight ropes meant better mattress support. Loose ropes meant you woke up with a sore back and maybe a mouse nestled in your blanket folds. So next time someone says sleep tight, just picture a Victorian mom pulling bed ropes like she's rigging a sailboat. The room sighs again with the night air, and you can almost hear the soft shuffle of slippers on hardwood floors. Maybe it's the maid carrying up a warmed brick for your feet, or maybe it's just the house settling, remembering its own stories. And somewhere in all of this, under layers of lace and lavender secret drawers and stitched initials, is the beating heart of an era that cared deeply about its things, about memory, about meaning. Even the beds weren't just beds. They were sanctuaries, vaults, confessionals, and sometimes admittedly fire hazards. You pull the blanket up to your chin, not lace-trimmed, no embroidered initials, but still warm, still part of some long human tradition of making nighttime feel just a little more secure, a little more magical. And in the quiet hum of the old world pressing gently into the present, your eyes begin to close, not out of boredom, but because history, when done right, doesn't need to shout to be felt. Sometimes it just has to whisper from beneath the mattress boards. The whisper beneath those old mattress boards fades, but the stillness lingers like dust motes floating through a shaft of sunlight in a room where no one's moved the furniture in decades. You shift slightly, not wanting to break the spell. Somewhere deep in the wooden bones of that Victorian bed frame, another secret waits, less in what was hidden inside it, and more in the stories that circled around it. Take, for instance, the curious case of what Victorians feared might visit them while they slept. Spoiler alert, it wasn't insomnia or existential dread, though those were probably there, too hidden, behind the starched pillowcases. It was ghosts, spirits, bad air, unseen forces thought to creep through the night and settle like a damp chill on your chest. To defend themselves, people didn't just say their prayers. They took action-lining bed frames with iron rods, keeping horseshoes under mattresses or scattering salt near doorways. Some even placed small charms in secret compartments, amulets, hair wrapped in ribbon, or folded paper with hastily scribbled blessings. Because if you can't outrun the supernatural, you can at least tuck a warning under your pillow and hope it reads the fine print. Now historians still argue whether these were truly beliefs or just traditions followed out of habit. Was Grandma really warding off evil, or was she just doing what her mother did before her? Either way, these nighttime rituals became part of the bed's role, a quiet guardian against everything from common colds to uninvited spirits. And then there's the whole ordeal of getting into bed. Not just flopping down, like we do now, but a mini production. Candles lit, chamber pot placed, slippers arranged just so. Bed curtains drawn. A small prayer maybe, or a last page of a book by flickering lamplight. The mattress possibly stuffed with horsehair feathers, or if you were poor and practical, straw would crunch softly beneath you as you climbed in with careful deliberation, hoping not to tip the whole structure sideways. Because yes, Victorian beds were tall, comically tall by today's standards. Getting in sometimes required a step stool or a helpful spouse with steady arms. Why so high? Several reasons swirl around. Status symbolism, better air circulation. Storage underneath, or more pragmatically, protection from cold drafts and rodents. You'd be amazed how motivated one becomes to sleep elevated when the alternative is waking up nose to nose with a floor-dwelling critter. This leads us neatly to one of the more unsung functions of these beds, their role as multi-level storage units. The space beneath wasn't just for ghost-repelling horseshoes, it was for trunks, boxes, hidden compartments. Even in some cases, live chickens. Yes, chickens. In rural areas on cold nights, a family might let a hen or two roost beneath the bed to benefit from the warmth. You're not sure if that's adorable or mildly terrifying, but it's absolutely on brand for the era's all-purpose furniture philosophy. Not all these storage spots were entirely domestic, though. In some homes particularly, those near busy roads or on the Underground Railroad bed compartments or trundle beds were used to hide travelers' runaways or those escaping danger. It was risky, often illegal, but it's another reminder of how beds, seemingly the most passive furniture, were sometimes right at the heart of big historical moments. There's something poetically sneaky about that isn't there. A place of rest also being a place of action. A structure meant for stillness, becoming a silent accomplice in rebellion or rescue. It gives your bed a little more gravity, knowing its ancestors were basically wooden superheroes. And while we're talking about gravity, let's not ignore the sheer weight of these things. Victorian beds weren't meant to be moved, ever. The headboards alone could require 2 or 3 people to haul into place. Once your bed was in the room, it stayed there like an immovable anchor around which the rest of your life quietly orbited. People rearranged entire homes to accommodate the bed, not the other way around. Here's a quirky historical footnote. During certain periods, especially around death, people would rotate the bed so the head faced east, symbolically aligning with resurrection or rebirth. It's unclear how many people genuinely believed this versus doing it to avoid social whispers. But the fact remains, the direction of your bed wasn't just a feng shui decision. It could be a spiritual statement. And remember those luxurious bed curtains. They weren't just decorative. They helped insulate heat, provided privacy, especially in shared rooms, and of course, made it dramatically easier to sit bolt upright at midnight and whisper, "Did you hear that?" a phrase, almost certainly uttered daily in a Victorian household. Inside those curtains, tucked away in secret compartments, or stuffed into mattress seams, were sometimes entire diaries. Written accounts of dreams, confessions, or daily miseries. Why? Because not everyone had the luxury of a locked drawer or private desk, and the bed cradling you in shadow and silence became the only safe place to bear your thoughts. Some of these hidden writings, when found centuries later, offered rare glimpses into otherwise invisible lives. And so that bed built with hinges and panels filled with straw, or feathers flanked by ghost-repelling trinkets, and sometimes an actual chicken becomes more than just a quirky Victorian contraption. It's a capsule of hopes, fears, warmth, noise, silence, and secrets. A theater of the mundane and the magical unfolding quietly, night after night. As you lie there, letting the room fade around you, you feel oddly comforted by how deeply humans have always cared about rest, how they've layered protection and meaning into even the softest corners of life. And maybe, just maybe, you start wondering what secrets your own bed might hold decades from now. You wake figuratively, of course, somewhere deep inside the carved footboard of another Victorian bed. It's a different one this time, just as grand, maybe a little creakier, but still full of hush-hush pockets and whispers of another life entirely. The mattress sighs as you shift your weight, and the heavy wood groans with a familiarity that makes you feel like you've been here before. But now we leave superstition behind for something even more sleep-inducing hygiene. Yes, we're talking about Victorian cleanliness, or depending on how charitable you're feeling, the illusion of cleanliness. Beds were battlegrounds in the war against disease, and sometimes the enemy wasn't cholera or typhoid. It was lice or fleas, or the uncomfortably persistent idea that bathing too often was in fact unhealthy. And yet Victorians were obsessed with appearing proper, fresh linens, spotless chamber pots, and the ubiquitous bed jacket, which was sort of like a sleep-themed blazer. You couldn't just shuffle around in your nightgown. That was practically a scandal. Let's dive into one mainstream historical fact, the arrival of spring cleaning as a formal practice. It wasn't just a nice idea, it was practically mandatory. As soon as the weather allowed, every textile feather pillow and panel of your ornate bed would be hauled out, beaten senseless with a rug beater, then flung across a hedgerow to air out. You haven't lived until you've watched a 10-pound feather mattress cartwheeling across a dewy field because someone forgot to anchor it with a shoe. Of course, hidden compartments added a thrilling obstacle to this. You couldn't exactly toss your bed in the sun if there were letters to your forbidden love hidden under the slats, or more realistically, a jar of clove oil for your aching joints. Yes, clove oil. Victorians had a thing for it. It was the essential oil before essential oils became influencer approved. Speaking of hidden compartments, here's where it gets juicy. And by juicy, we mean faintly scandalous, in a strictly PG Victorian sense smuggling. You see, not all compartments were for prayer charms or old socks. Some were for contraband. And while it wasn't exactly a Bond movie, people did tuck small valuables, jewelry coins, even forbidden books into bedframe cubbies to protect them from theft fire or nosy in-laws. In some seafaring towns, beds doubled as smugglers' lockers. There's at least one documented case where a customs agent found imported silk stuffed into a hollow bedpost, prompting what must have been a very awkward breakfast conversation. Historians still argue whether these instances were common practice or rare ingenuity. But the point remains, the Victorian bed was not just a place for sleeping. It was a vault, a closet, a safe, a smuggler's trunk hiding in plain sight beneath layers of lace and starched sheets. And speaking of lace, let's talk fashion, because yes, your bed had to be dressed too. Ruffles, pleats, tassels, fringe so aggressive it might as well have been alive. Wealthy Victorians didn't just sleep, they performed their sleep. Bedroom decor was another way to flex. The grander your bed, the more likely your guests would swoon at its opulence. Some even staged bedroom tours for dinner guests like a particularly cozy museum exhibit. Yet underneath all that finery things could get Well, a little grim. Mattresses didn't have removable covers. If something spilled, it stayed. If something organic happened, it soaked in. Some beds were passed down for generations, and brace yourself, rarely cleaned inside. There are first-hand accounts of opening up old feather mattresses and discovering not just feathers, but buttons pins. The odd rodent skeleton and enough dust to choke a mid-sized bear. Fringe tidbit. During a brief mid-century wellness trend, some health experts encouraged families to build slatted compartments into bed frames so the mattress could breathe, which sounds sensible until you realize this also allowed bugs and cold air to sneak in with equal enthusiasm. But hey, at least your pillow had fresh air. Still, not everyone could afford beds fancy enough for secret compartments or design flexes. Poorer families, especially in tenements or rural communities, often shared beds among multiple people with makeshift frames cobbled together from crates or scavenged wood. Privacy was a luxury. Some children slept 3 to a bed, their dreams layered atop one another like patchwork quilts. Here's something oddly beautiful, though these humble beds sometimes had carvings or initials scratched into their legs. Tiny acts of ownership, memory, or love etched into the most unassuming surfaces. A child's name, a date, a message so worn it's more groove than text. These too are compartments of a sort, containers for history you don't even realize you're carrying. Oh, and here's a scholarly debate you didn't expect to lie awake thinking about. Some researchers argue whether these hidden compartments were deliberately designed for secrecy or simply products of convenience. Did the carpenter mean to craft a hidey hole for family heirlooms? Or was he just working with leftover wood, intentional stealth, or happy accident? The jury's still out. And honestly, both answers make the bed more magical. Now, just as your eyelids begin to grow heavier, consider this. The Victorian bedroom was not just a sanctuary but a stage. It bore witness to illness and birth secrets and confessions, the life and death. For many, it was the only truly private space. They had a world within 4 walls guarded by heavy wood-drawn curtains and the secrets hidden within. And here you are now drifting slowly through that world, following the map etched by history, not in ink but in fabric folds, wood grain, and the quiet hush of memories that refuse to leave. You're still lying there cocooned in imaginary lace and velvet, surrounded by the fading scent of lavender sachets and the faint creak of wood that's seen too much. Outside the window, imaginary though it is, a horse-drawn carriage rattles by on cobbled streets. It's not your carriage, and thank goodness, you're not going anywhere. You're staying right here, nestled in the warm hush of a Victorian bed that's holding on to a few more secrets. Tonight's particular secret, the roll beds played in death. Yes, I know, cozy bedtime material, right? But Victorian culture was nothing if not obsessed with mortality. The bed wasn't just for sleeping or storing contraband or hiding love letters. It was also a ceremonial space, a theater for final acts. In fact, some beds were built with death in mind. High posts for hanging black crepe during mourning, deep side rails so the dying could be easily propped up for visitors. And sometimes, just sometimes, hidden compartments filled with keepsakes meant to be passed down after someone took their last breath. Mainstream historical fact. In many Victorian households, it was expected that you would die at home in your bed. Hospitals were for emergencies and the poor, proper folks. They died surrounded by family, right there on the feather-stuffed mattress that had seen their first cough, their first crush, and now their final sigh. Imagine that for a moment your whole life bracketed by the same bed. And it wasn't all morbid. Sometimes those secret compartments became time capsules. A lock of hair from a deceased child, a tiny pressed flower from a funeral wreath, a handwritten will tucked between slats and mattress because, let's face it, safes were for banks and murder mysteries. These quiet keepsakes weren't hidden for shame, they were hidden for safekeeping, for memory. Now here's a fringe tidbit for you some people, especially in rural parts of England and Australia, actually installed what they called corpse drawers in the bases of their beds. No, not as spooky as it sounds. These were shallow sliding panels where burial clothes or funeral tokens were stored in preparation for the inevitable. It was seen as practical, if a little macabre. You didn't want to be caught unprepared for death after all. That would be well rude, and the etiquette around death in bed was just as complex as the bed itself. If someone passed, the bed had to be stripped immediately, and the sheets either burned or washed in boiling water with lye. Mirrors in the room were covered, clocks were stopped, and mourning garb was fetched, sometimes from, you guessed it, compartments in the furniture. Grief was a performance, and the bedroom center stage. Historians still argue whether the ritualization of death in the bedroom was more about reverence or control. Was it spiritual, psychological, or just logistical? Since dragging someone out to the parlor wasn't exactly easy in a corset and 5 layers of crinoline. Like so many things Victorian, it's probably a tangled mess of all 3. But don't worry, we're not lingering in death too long. Let's lighten the atmosphere with something surprising. Victorian bedrooms were also places of invention, literally. A strange number of patents were filed for bedroom-adjacent gadgets, and beds with built-in compartments often came equipped with curious mechanisms. One-click privacy screens, alarm bells rigged with pulleys, even early versions of what we'd now call panic buttons. If you were particularly fancy, or just really worried about intruders, your bed might be booby-trapped. Yes, like Home Alone, but with antimacassars and chamber pots. There's a documented case from 1889 where a man in Bristol built a bed with a spring-loaded false bottom. He claimed it was to store books, but rumor had it he used it to hide his brandy collection from his very temperance-minded wife, which frankly is the kind of stealth we respect. Also, let's not overlook how personal these beds became. Carpenters were often commissioned to customize beds with initials, family crests, or meaningful symbols. Hidden drawers weren't just practical, they were sentimental. A mother might store baby shoes in one. A bachelor might squirrel away his stash of scandalous novels, which by Victorian standards could just mean Frankenstein. All these uses for compartments made one thing very clear. These weren't just beds. They were biographies in wood and fabric, time capsules on 4 legs. Every groove, every creak, every dusty corner told a story. Let's pause for a moment and just picture it. You padding into a candle-lit room. Your shoes squeak slightly on the floorboards. The air smells faintly of beeswax and old roses. The bed looms like a ship at anchor. As you fold back the heavy coverlet, stitched with flowers faded by decades, something small catches your eye. A panel cleverly inset into the footboard. You press it and it clicks open. Inside could be anything: a pressed flower, a coin, a folded scrap of a letter that begins, "My dearest, if you are reading this." Even if the compartment is empty, the story is still there. Because someone carved that space, someone needed it, imagined it, used it. That need is a kind of fingerprint preserved in wood and time. And speaking of fingerprints, no actual fingerprints remain, of course. The oils are long gone. But under lamplight you could almost imagine a faint mark here, a thumb-sized dent there. Maybe even the faint drag of fingernails tracing a line, while someone waited for the knock of a midnight visitor. We're not suggesting ghosts, not exactly, but beds like this, they remember things, and now so do you. You're still nestled in that carved wooden cocoon, tucked among memories and dust motes, as the story creaks ever onward. The fire's still crackling somewhere quietly, sleepily, and if you listen closely, maybe you'll hear the rustle of something slipping into another compartment. A note, a keepsake, or maybe just the sigh of another chapter being tucked into place. So here we are now, turning toward the stranger side of Victorian bed culture, their role in social disguise. Because if there's one thing Victorians loved, more than complicated etiquette and arsenic in wallpaper, it was pretending everything was perfectly fine, when in fact, it very much was not. Secret compartments weren't always about mourning or romance. Sometimes they were about saving face, literally and metaphorically. Let's say you're a middle-class Londoner. Your neighbor just came into an inheritance and installed a marble fireplace. You, however, are on the verge of selling your grandfather's pocket watch to pay for coal. What do? You disguise your modesty, maybe not with false wealth, but with clever concealment. Hidden compartments in bed frames weren't just storage, they were social shields. You might stash worn slippers out of view or slide a drawer shut to hide mending you can't afford to have done professionally. Some even stored imitation jewelry inside the bed ready to be casually displayed during breakfast. In bed moments just in case someone important stopped by. Yes, Victorians were extra like that. Mainstream historical fact. Respectability in Victorian society wasn't just about wealth, it was about performance. Entire households were choreographed like polite theater. And nowhere was this more obvious than the bedroom, which had to appear prim and proper, even if the ceiling leaked and the rent collector knocked twice a week. Quirky tidbit. Some women reportedly sewed false prayer books to store love notes, or even gambling slips, keeping them tucked inside drawers, in the headboards disguised under a Bible or a lace-edged handkerchief. Because nothing says piety like a hidden bet on a horse named Gentle Miss. And those with slightly more eccentric tendencies took things even further. One eccentric Cambridge man reportedly had a rotating bed, a literal spinning platform that shifted positions via a pulley system to face different moods of the day. Morning light fireplace view. Moonlight, choose your aesthetic, hidden in the base. A miniature liquor cabinet, of course, for the days when moonlight just didn't cut it. Now not every bed had these little architectural secrets. But enough did that carpenters of the time developed a discreet shorthand for such features. In old ledgers you'll see notes like one religious recess or private tuck panel, which essentially meant I built your scandal drawer and I'm not telling a soul. Historians still argue whether the trend toward concealed compartments stemmed from moral repression or sheer practicality. Was it that people had so much to hide or simply so much to protect? In a world where privacy was scarce and propriety was everything a hidden drawer could mean. The difference between scandal and salvation. And then, of course, there were maids' beds narrow, unadorned, usually tucked under staircases or into tiny corners of servants' quarters. They didn't boast compartments in the traditional sense, but their very invisibility was a kind of hidden structure. Some maids reportedly carved tiny cubbies under the bed slats, where they kept letters or gifts from visiting footmen, romantic trysts sealed in pine and silence. Those lower-class beds may have lacked polish, but they were still part of the social mask. While upstairs bedrooms featured all the finery and fancy lockboxes, these humble beds kept lives and dreams folded just as tightly. Now picture this. You're stepping into one of those houses. You follow a maid's hurried footsteps down a narrow hallway, past the grand staircase, into a smaller chamber behind the kitchen. The light here is dimmer, the bed smaller. But even here there's a softness in the way the sheets are folded, a privacy in the scarf draped over the headboard. Maybe a compartment carved under the mattress, not to hide valuables, but to hide the feeling of wanting them. This duality, the upstairs and the downstairs, the hidden and the displayed, was the very heart of Victorian domestic life. And beds more than you'd expect reflected that perfectly. Even the materials used had messages. Mahogany for the rich oak, for the respectable painted pine, for those barely hanging on. Carvers sometimes inscribed initials not just for decoration, but to signal status, subtle indicators of lineage and inheritance. And yes, there were even fake carvings, false crests, etched into beds to suggest noble roots where none existed. Because nothing says faking it, like pretending your bed is aristocratic. Sometimes the beds outlived the lies. Years later, when auctions cleared out dusty manors, carpenters would pry open panels and discover all sorts of social debris, canceled invitations, unpaid bills, even apology notes never sent. All relics of a society that wanted very badly to seem in control. But here's a soft thought to fall asleep to. Isn't there something touching about it all? About the human impulse to tuck things away, not to deceive necessarily, but to preserve, whether it's grief, love, shame, or pride. We fold our stories into compartments like letters, in envelopes trusting wood and time to keep them safe. And the bed. It receives those secrets without question. Day after day, year after year, long after we're gone, it stays silent. So you stretch your limbs a bit beneath your imaginary Victorian quilt. You think of how many people have lain in beds like this, wondering if they'd be found out, or if their story would be safely locked away. It's a strange comfort, a kind of gentle mystery. The idea that every squeaky floorboard and loose slat might hold someone else's unfinished sentence. And with that image tucked beneath your pillow, you drift a little deeper into the dream of oak and velvet dust and velvet hush. You're sinking deeper into this antique mattress of stories every spring, a creak from history, every thread in the coverlet a whispered memory. It's getting easier now to picture yourself in this world of lace curtains, flickering gas lamps and drawers that know too much. You wouldn't be surprised if a clock somewhere chimed 13 just to keep things interesting. Tonight, though, we lean closer to the working hands, the craftspeople who carved, nailed, and hid entire lives within 4 posts and a headboard. Victorian bedmakers were a particular breed of artisan. More than carpenters, they were in a way co-conspirators, accomplices in design, function, and secrecy. They knew that a bed wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a statement, an insurance policy, a vault. And for many families, commissioning a bed wasn't about picking something off a showroom floor. It was a full-on collaboration. I'd like a medium-firm mattress with optional gilt compartment, please. Maybe something that says comfortable, but also, I never talk about my feelings. Mainstream historical fact. Victorian cabinet makers often worked from apprenticeships, sometimes starting as young as 12. learning not just how to carve dovetail joints but also how to read social codes, how to know when a client wanted a compartment for jewelry versus, say, love letters or laudanum. They'd sketch out ideas in big ledgers, some of which still exist today, filled with scribbled dimensions, wood types, and mysterious notes, like panel for discretion or hinged privacy rail. Sometimes you wonder if they were building furniture or writing Victorian soap operas. And the materials, each type of wood carried its own message. Mahogany whispered wealth, walnut meant taste. Rosewood was often imported, fragrant and delicate, expensive enough to suggest refined secrecy. A drawer lined with rosewood was never for socks. One of the more fringed tidbits, certain bedmakers left their own marks hidden inside beds. Tiny signatures burned under the slats, or a chip of colored wax tucked into the corner of a drawer like a quiet "I was here." Maybe it was pride, maybe it was an insurance policy for craftsmanship, or maybe it was just the Victorian version of tagging a street lamp. And if you ever have the good fortune to tour an old Victorian house museum, you might catch a glimpse of one of these clever creations. A bed with a false back, on the headboard for example, or a side rail that lifts with a specific twist of the wrist. There's something delightful about the idea that long after a family left the bed kept its mouth shut. Some of these secret compartments were surprisingly complex. Not just drawers and cubbies, but entire mechanisms. One infamous example. A banker from Liverpool had a bed frame with a lever hidden in a carved lion's paw, pull it the right way, and a panel opened beneath the mattress, revealing a safe. Not a small drawer, a safe. Big enough to fit several ledger's coins, and possibly his peace of mind. Historians still argue whether these complex builds were out of genuine need or just a form of Victorian flexing. Did people really need so many secret drawers? Or were they just showing off their ability to afford secrets? Now shift your attention to something more intimate. The sound of a wooden plane scraping over oak. The smell of fresh glue mixed with beeswax polish. You're standing in a workshop. A man in a smudged apron runs his hand along a length of timber. He knows the grain like he knows his own palm, knows where a hidden panel can sit without warping. He marks the wood measures cuts, no power tools, no shortcuts. He knows that this bed will outlast its owners, that one day someone will lie in it who doesn't know what's tucked into the headboard. That same workshop might have produced beds for wealthy homes and modest inns alike, some built to dazzle, others built to endure, and the most well-loved beds. They weren't always the fanciest. They were the ones that adapted, had parts repaired drawers, oiled little compartments added with every generation. A family might outgrow a parlor or a wardrobe, but the bed stayed. There's even a record of a traveling bed maker who specialized in converting old beds into newer models, a sort of Victorian upcycler. You'd call him in to modernize the look, but maybe he'd also slide in a little storage while he was at it. Because you never know when you'll need an extra hiding place for, I don't know, contraband tea. And it wasn't all about secrets either. Sometimes these compartments were practical, places to keep bedtime books or handkerchiefs for when London fog crawled in through the windows. In colder homes, warm bricks were stored beneath the mattress heated in the fire, then slipped under the bed to create a toasty nook. Not exactly high-tech, but effective, unless you forgot they were there and toasted your toes by accident. You begin to feel here how much trust was involved. In the maker, in the material, in the idea that a physical object could hold not just weight, but meaning, that a person could sleep better, knowing that something precious was quietly waiting just out of sight. Maybe it was money, maybe it was love, maybe it was just the luxury of privacy in a time when so much was on display. It's a beautiful irony that a society obsessed with appearances puts so much energy into hiding things well, and that in doing so they made objects that were somehow more honest beds that knew more than the people who slept in them. So you lie back again in your imaginary four-poster. Run your hand along the frame, knowing that somewhere, maybe beneath your shoulder or along the side rail, there's something you don't know about, and it makes you feel safer. Not because you know what's hidden, but because something is. Because secrets when held well become stories, and stories when told gently become dreams. You're still resting there in that creaky old bed with secrets stitched into every joint. And now the night deepens, not just outside the frosted window pane, but inside the very story you're nestled within. The room is quieter now. The fire in the hearth is a low hum of glowing embers, and your thoughts turn to those who spent their entire lives around beds like these, not just using them, but passing them down. And sometimes hiding more than money. It turns out Victorian beds didn't just serve as secret safes, they sometimes played host to entire dramas, husbands and wives at odds over finances, children sneaking biscuits where they shouldn't, servants who knew far more than they let on, sometimes slipping letters into a mattress lining like it was just part of the laundry. Beds were ground zero for little rebellions. Because while the parlor was for showing off, the bedroom was for knowing things. One mainstream historical fact is this: many Victorian homes were multi-generational. Grandparents, children, grandchildren, sometimes even boarders, all coexisting under one sharply gabled roof. Privacy was rare, so a bed with a hidden compartment wasn't luxury, it was necessity. It might be the only locked space someone had. Not every home had a study or a safe, but almost every home had a bed. Fringe tidbit. There's a recurring tale of a governess in Yorkshire who hid an engagement ring in a hollow bed leg after her fiancé's disapproving mother tried to confiscate it. It stayed there for years. Long after the engagement fizzled, the ring was discovered by a young boy who thought it was part of a pirate's hoard. Technically, he wasn't wrong. Now imagine those households' rooms lit by gaslight or candles, families, tiptoeing through nightly rituals. Somewhere a child is being tucked in. Somewhere else, someone's quietly checking that a drawer still shuts, flush with the frame. And maybe, just maybe, someone is making a decision to trust the bed with something irreplaceable. You realize how intimate that act is. Not just owning a bed, but believing in it. Like believing in a loyal dog or a particularly smug cat. Trusting it to remember where you put something even when you forget. There's a comfort in that, isn't there? Historians still argue whether hidden bed compartments were common features or more of an upper-class quirk. Some argue that working-class families had no need or means for such luxuries. Others suggest the opposite, that modest homes were more likely to rely on clever furniture because there simply wasn't room for safes and trunks and lockboxes. When space is tight, every plank becomes a possibility. And of course, not all compartments were created equal. Some were intricate, a carved medallion that slid sideways when pressed just so. Others were comically obvious in hindsight. A drawer under the mattress that was just slightly too wide to be accidental. You'd probably find it within 5 minutes of poking around. Unless, of course, you were meant not to see it. You begin to appreciate how deeply ingrained this was in the era's culture. Victorian magazines sometimes included illustrations of bedroom furniture, with labels like gentleman's drawer or private lady's shelf. And while these euphemisms sound like rejected album titles, they reveal a whole world of coded storage etiquette. A proper bed didn't just hold your body, it held your identity. With compartments for grooming tools, morning jewelry, writing kits, and in a few very dramatic cases, loaded pistols. Yes, really. At least 3 recorded examples exist of pistols hidden in beds, not for defense against intruders, but more often for personal dramas. Family feuds, sibling rivalries, unfortunate marriage arrangements. Let's just say Victorian beds saw more tension than most soap operas. But the most common hidden items, letters. So many letters. Tied in twine, folded in secret, tucked into slats where they'd be safe from prying eyes. Love letters, business correspondence, recipes, wills, confessions, all resting quietly under thin layers of wool and ticking fabric. Imagine being a young maid, changing the sheets, and hearing a faint rustle, not from the pillow but from the mattress itself. You lift a seam and discover someone's carefully written sorrow or declaration of love. Do you read it? Do you pretend it's just more fluffing? That moment, that fork in the narrative, is pure Victorian suspense. And as you lie there, you start to feel the weight of those stories, not heavy but layered, like the bed itself, because for every hidden compartment, there was someone with a reason to hide something, and for every tucked-away letter, a person who hoped it would one day be found or never be. So many hopes pressed into stuffing and slats, so many choices made in the dark. Like the servant girl who slid her savings into the bedpost every week, planning her escape from service, or the widower who kept his wife's hair comb hidden beneath the headboard long after remarriage, or the child who drew pictures and stuffed them between the mattress and the frame, convinced they were invisible. You stretch just slightly, hearing the imaginary creak of the wood beneath you, as though the bed remembers these too. It's no longer just a place of sleep, it's a time capsule, one you're lying in right now. And just think, centuries from now, some museum curator might open an old bed frame and find a folded piece of yellowing paper. Maybe it's a shopping list, or maybe it's something more. A moment of quiet rebellion, a confession, a love that didn't quite make it to daylight, and that more than any grand historic event is what Victorian beds captured best. Not just the secrets of society, but the quiet personal stories, the dreams and fears and small acts of bravery hidden not for shame, but for safekeeping. And as you drift towards sleep, wrapped in your own warm layers, you might start to imagine what you would hide in your own secret drawer. Something silly, something sentimental, or maybe just a note for the next dreamer to find. Tucked into the heart of the bed, waiting like a soft whisper in the dark. You haven't moved much. Maybe your fingers twitch now and then, or your foot nudges the edge of a blanket, but your mind is deep in the wood grain of history, now breathing the scent of old linen and beeswax polish, wandering the forgotten spaces of beds that held more than dreams. You're not just drifting through time, you're practically curled up inside it. And now we turn to the curious craftsmanship that made those secret compartments possible. Victorian furniture making was more than artistry. It was obsession fused with ingenuity, and let's be honest, a touch of paranoia. Because who needs a bed with 6 false panels and a hinge only activated by pulling a brass knob shaped like a cherub's nose? Absolutely no one. But you want it, don't you? One mainstream historical fact that tucks into the corners of this story. During the Victorian era, cabinet makers and carpenters were held in nearly the same esteem as architects. Furniture design was seen as a form of intellectual achievement. Many artisans apprenticed for years, mastering the deceptive tricks of dovetail joints, hidden screws, and pressure-triggered mechanisms. The very best of them. They didn't just build beds, they built puzzles. Now here's the quirky fringe bit. In 1878, a London cabinet maker named Alfie Gorse, possibly the most British name in existence, was rumored to have created a bed of illusions for a noblewoman with 5 unruly children. Each child had a drawer. None knew about the others. Alfie claimed he installed 17 hidden compartments, though only 9 were ever found. The others, presumably, are still waiting for the right knock or whisper. You begin to imagine those carpenters in their workshops, surrounded by curls of shavings and the soft scent of varnish, candles flickering, tiny brass screws held between their lips, building furniture like it was a treasure map. And in many ways it was. For the right family, a well-made bed was part safe, part diary, part shrine. Historians still argue whether secret bed compartments were designed primarily for security or symbolism. Some say they offered practical protection against burglars or nosy in-laws. Others argue they were status symbols, like showing off that you could afford to hide things no one else even had. After all, if you owned a bed with 6 secrets, you were clearly someone, and the secrets themselves. They weren't always dramatic. Sometimes they were as mundane as sewing needles or saved buttons. A stash of ginger chews for night coughs, a thimble passed down 3 generations. But every item, no matter how small, carried meaning. You lie still and imagine the daily rituals around those beds. Morning sunlight through lace curtains, a servant knocking gently before entering, the ritual folding of nightcaps, the creak of the floorboards, the slow lifting of a mattress edge. Just a glance, just to be sure the letter was still there. The ring hadn't slipped away. The money hadn't vanished into the dreams beneath. These rituals weren't just quaint, they were survival. Women especially had limited autonomy in Victorian England. A secret compartment might be the only place they could hide an allowance, a letter, a book deemed improper. A hidden drawer was a sliver of freedom, a whisper of control in a world that offered so little. You start to feel it, the trust in wood, in fabric, in secrecy. The quiet rebellion of a hidden compartment. It makes sense now why these beds were cherished, passed down, whispered about. Not just furniture, not just comfort, but confidants, silent partners in schemes, heartbreaks, and maybe even mild snacks at midnight. You shift slightly in your imagined bed, feeling the press of invisible compartments beneath your shoulder blades. If you listen hard enough, maybe you'll hear them click open. Maybe they're still keeping something safe, something meant only for you. One story drifts up from the slats about a child during the Great Exhibition of 1851 who climbed into her parents' bed while they were away searching for a toy. Instead, she found a velvet pouch filled with coins and a brittle letter addressed to someone not her mother. She never said a word. But she stopped asking for toys after that. Some beds teach quiet lessons. Another tale murmurs from a guest room in a rural vicarage. A young man on leave from university, given the good mattress as a treat, discovers a journal tucked into the headboard. It isn't his. It's the record of another guest written over 10 years. Page after page of dreams, fears, and recipes for soup. The man adds one entry, then replaces the journal exactly as he found it. There's something sacred about that isn't there. The respect for mystery, the decision to leave a secret intact. You wonder if you'd do the same, or would your curiosity tug too hard? You start to think of your own bed now. Modern, maybe memory foam, maybe creaky metal. And you wonder, is there anything hidden inside it? Has anyone slipped something between the mattress and the baseboard? Could it happen without your knowing? You smile a little at the idea. The thought that maybe even now, the spirit of Victorian secrecy lives on not just in antique shops, but in the way we hide a gift under a pillow or a note in a book, or tuck away that one weird sock we still refuse to throw out. Victorian beds remind you that people have always needed space for secrets, not because they were doing something wrong, but because they needed something just for themselves. A space untouched by others, a little private pocket in the world. You glance at the foot of the bed in your mind and imagine a compartment you've never opened. Maybe tonight's the night. You reach forward gently, press where the grain shifts ever so slightly, and there it is, the soft click of something opening. You don't even need to look inside. The mystery is enough. That's the kind of comfort old beds gave. Not just warmth, not just sleep, but the assurance that you could hide a part of yourself, and it would still be there waiting when you were ready. You lie there in the hush, letting your mind drift deeper into that carved Victorian bed, one hand almost brushing a panel that probably shouldn't move but does just slightly. And as you breathe in, you realize we're not done yet. Because what happens when those compartments are forgotten? Victorian beds lasted. Some passed from generation to generation, each owner layering their life onto the wood and linen. But not all compartments were emptied before their keepers passed on. Some were locked and lost, and that's where things get especially delightful, because every now and then, one of those long-closed spaces is rediscovered. Mainstream historical fact. In the early 20th century, when many Victorian homes were modernized or demolished, furniture was often sold off stripped for parts or simply discarded. Auction records from the time show a curious spike in buyers from antique shops scouring estate sales specifically for elaborate beds. Why? Because rumors had spread that valuables, rings, war medals, even cash were tucked into secret spots and forgotten. These weren't ghost stories, they were scavenger hunts. Take, for example, the case of a Welsh farmhouse cleared in 1923. A 4-poster bed was sold to a traveling furniture dealer for what today would be about $20. The buyer took it apart for refinishing and found a hidden compartment behind the headboard. Inside a carefully folded map, a signet ring, and a brooch containing a curl of hair. The map was illegible. The ring was traced to a long-dead magistrate, and the brooch, it was left anonymous. Romantic, eerie, and ultimately unsolved. Your brain, now quiet and woolly with sleep, hums gently at the thought. All that time, generations of people, sleeping beside these secrets unaware. A whole history of whispers trapped in the wood. Now here's the fringe tidbit you didn't expect. In the 1980s, a particularly eccentric collector from Suffolk began buying Victorian beds exclusively for their hidden compartments. He claimed to have found over 200 items of interest, including love notes, handkerchiefs, and most dramatically, a mummified rat, wearing what looked like a doll's hat. Whether the hat was intentional or the rat just got very lucky remains well unclear, but he displayed it proudly, in a glass case, with a tiny Victorian bonnet perched on top. Historians still argue whether these hidden treasures should be treated as personal heirlooms, archaeological artifacts, or simply very old junk. Some museums consider them part of a broader social history, unfiltered glimpses into daily life. Others shrug and say, it's a glove. A moldy glove. Please don't donate more gloves. But there's something deeper at work here. Because even if the glove is moldy, it was once cherished. Someone tucked it away, probably thinking they'd come back for it. And they never did. That moment captured in fabric and forgotten isn't junk. It's human. You find yourself strangely moved by the thought of these tiny legacies. Not grand, not earth-shattering, but honest. A child's crayon drawing, a scrap of lace, a pressed flower. They say more than big monuments ever could. Imagine now, in the velvet dark of your sleepy mind, a family unpacking one of those old beds. It's been in the attic for decades. Dust motes float in shafts of golden light. They tug at a warped drawer that shouldn't open, and suddenly there it is. A crumpled photo. No one knows the face, but they keep it, just in case. Another family finds a love letter dated 1897, signed Yours Always T. No last name, no address. The envelope smells faintly of lavender. No one dares throw it away. You stretch your toes just a little, imagining those letters still rustling under the mattress. You'd half expect to find one tonight, wouldn't you? Maybe your bed's hiding something after all. Maybe every creak means it's trying to remember. Victorian secret compartments weren't just about hiding, they were about preserving. It's easy to forget that back then options were limited. You didn't have a digital photo album or a backup cloud drive. If you wanted to keep something safe, you needed a physical place, and preferably one that didn't scream, "Look here, beds were perfect." Intimate, undisturbed, and let's be honest, a bit dramatic. One often repeated rumor claims that Queen Victoria herself had a secret drawer in her favorite guest bed at Osborne House. According to her maid's memoirs, it was used to store tokens and quiet amusements, which may or may not have included candy. It's never been confirmed. But you can't help smiling at the idea of the monarch of the British Empire sneaking licorice under her pillow. There's an odd kind of comfort in that, right? The great and powerful tucking away sweets like a child reminds you that everyone, no matter how grand, needs a secret stash now and then. Your breathing slows again. The blankets feel heavier. You start to imagine which part of your own bed could hold a secret. The slats, the baseboard inside, a leg maybe sealed with a cap. You make a mental note to check in the morning. But let's be real, you won't. And that's okay. Because part of the charm of these stories is not knowing. The mystery is the whole point. The fact that there might be something waiting is often better than actually finding it. That's the Victorian way. Layers of fabric, layers of meaning. There's one last tale you should know tonight. It's short. In 1895, a boy named Henry was given a tiny wooden key by his grandfather, who whispered only, "for the bed." Henry never found the lock, but he kept the key, worn shiny from years of turning it over, in his fingers. When Henry died in 1963, the key was in his top drawer, still labeled "for the bed." The bed itself had been sold during the war, so somewhere maybe in a farmhouse or a second-hand store, a bed still holds a lock. And the key to it is long lost. Or maybe it's under your pillow right now. Who's to say by now your eyelids feel as heavy as a cast-iron bedpost? You breathe slowly, curled into a warm Victorian quilt, in your mind as the last threads of our story unwind like fraying embroidery. But we've one more creaky step to take. Because for all their function and flourish, Victorian beds didn't exist in isolation. They echoed through society, trade, even crime. Mainstream historical fact. During the height of Victorian smuggling, yes, smuggling, some cunning traders used elaborate bed frames to conceal contraband. Beds traveled across borders in shipping crates labeled as genteel furnishings, while tucked inside were goods banned or heavily taxed opium, rare books, imported spirits, even stolen jewels. A well-crafted sleigh bed wasn't just furniture, it was plausible deniability with a headboard. The British Customs Office once reported a case where 5 crates marked sleeping equipment colonial origin turned out to contain a dozen Belgian rifles stuffed into hollowed-out side rails. When questioned, the importer insisted they were part of the mattress support structure. You almost admire the gall. But here's a fringe tidbit you wouldn't guess. Spiritualists, yes. The séance happy. Victorians who thought table wrapping was the height of communication sometimes modified beds to include spirit shelves. These weren't quite secret compartments but recessed ledges, where objects like bells' feathers or slates would mysteriously move during a demonstration. Of course, a hidden string or breath from an assistant made the miracle happen, but attendees swore they heard Grandma Ethel whispering through the bed springs. Historians still argue whether these were genuine tools of spiritual exploration or just well-crafted parlor tricks, but even the skeptics agree the Victorians didn't just lie in bed, they lived in them, prayed in them, grieved in them, occasionally hoarded fruitcake in them, really. One museum catalog lists a petrified plum pudding found in a bedpost niche, still wrapped, still technically edible. Please don't try. You begin to understand just how central beds were to life back then. More than rest, they were repositories of secrets, theaters of drama, vaults of comfort. People were born in them, died in them, read Dickens and wept over tragedies in them. Beds were where women gave birth and husbands confessed their sins, where letters were written and never sent, where crumbs multiplied with zero explanation. They were almost a second house inside the house, an enclosed world, a wooden cocoon. And now in your warm, drowsy silence, that idea lingers. The next time you lie down, you might feel your mattress differently. You might imagine the ghosts of other sleepers, other stories gently sighing through the coils. You might tap the headboard once just to make sure it's solid or hollow. Because let's face it, if your bed had a secret compartment, would you really want to know what's in it? Or is the not knowing kind of perfect? Let's take one last look before we close the shutters. A rural English couple finds an heirloom bed left behind in a barn. They scrub it clean. One day their curious child pokes at a knot in the wood and click, it opens. Inside is a perfectly folded pair of baby shoes. No note, just the shoes. A whisper from history, asking nothing, saying everything. A collector in Melbourne buys a 4-poster for its decorative canopy. While refinishing the legs, he uncovers a hollow filled with hand-drawn sketches. Figures dancing, some holding lanterns dated 1874. The ink still dark. A dream stored in cedar. A widow in Glasgow opens her late husband's bedside drawer for the first time in years. Beneath handkerchiefs and pocket watches is a compartment she'd never noticed. Inside is a letter addressed to her, written decades earlier. She reads it alone and smiles. Maybe someday someone finds something you left behind. A note, a book, a lock of hair. Maybe they won't know your name, but maybe they'll smile too. You inhale slowly now. Let the final details melt into velvet shadows and soft candlelight. Let every mystery remain, just that a quiet curiosity beneath the bed frame waiting. No need to check tonight. Let the compartments rest. Let the beds creak their ancient lullabies. Let your own story settle into the sheets. And now, wind down 300 words. Let your breathing slow now, just a little more. You've walked a long and winding trail through dust-covered hallways and velvet-curtained bedrooms, past brass knobs and candle stubs through the secret panels and soft hollows of forgotten beds. It's okay to let go of the story now. No need to remember every detail. Let the images blur like shadows in warm lamplight, half seen, half imagined. A bed by the fire, a drawer that slides open with a whisper, a letter with a name you never knew. You're not meant to solve the mystery. You're meant to rest in it, float inside it, feel the weight of the blankets on your body. Not just tonight's blankets, but all the ones before. Worn quilts, grandma's patchwork, that sleeping bag with cartoon characters from when you were little. They're still there somewhere inside the fabric of memory, still warm. The world outside has grown quiet now. Even the floorboards have stopped their groaning. The stories are done for the night. The secrets are safe. And you don't need to do anything more. No drawers to open, no doors to check. Just the gentle rise and fall of your breath, in and out. Like waves, like the ticking of a clock beside your bed. Whatever you were holding on to, let it go. Whatever you were hoping to find, maybe it's already here. You are safe. You are still. You are home. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.